Hi, this is Joe Mullings and The Other Side. Guest today is Dennis Kogan. Dennis is the co-founder and CEO of Caresyntax, and he's chatting with us today from a lockdown situation in California in Menlo Park. Dennis, thanks for joining us today.
Thank you, Joe.
As I mentioned, he is the CEO of Caresyntax, and Caresyntax is one of the leading organizations in the healthcare medtech world that has been providing a cloud-based solution for connectivity for those devices in the device world that need to be connected. And that could be point of care, it could be robotics, and I'll probably hand it off to Dennis here for him to best describe what Caresyntax does and why solutions like this platform may be part of the answer moving forward in healthcare.
Yes, as you mentioned, at the core of our company is the ability to capture raw surgical and acute care data from all key sources. And of course, medical devices are a pretty key raw source of the ground truth of what's happening in the hospitals. And so we help both our device partners and our hospital partners manage key operational and patient safety priorities using the best sources of data that there are. And part of this is the medical device world. I think, broadly, in a normal scenario, we do a lot of different things, but just to kind of skip forward to the current environment, what do? We help hospitals at the end of the day address some of the key capacity challenges that they have in their surgical and critical care departments. Being able to help understand how to safely reallocate or scale down key procedures to acute care, even more acute ones such as oncology cases, being able to really figure out and rank procedures in terms of likely burden, remove that responsibility solely from the shoulders of physicians who may be doing this qualitatively, and of course invoke external expertise, for surgeons who might not be able to travel on site, so create all kinds of remote learning opportunities. So, at the end of the day, we have a variety of applications, very mature ones that can pretty virtually help you operate, and that means both clinical and throughput side.
So as I take a Caresyntax platform or a platform similar to that, and I lay it over what we're going through today. So we've got overloaded healthcare centers, meaning hospitals and even sort of makeshift. We're seeing now hotels and even schools being converted, and looking to increase efficiencies because the burden is just going to continue. I don't even think we've seen the worst of it yet in the United States. Where does this type of digital efficiency and connectivity potentially overlay on what we're facing today?
Yeah, I mean, it isn't the day-to-day decisions at the moment, right? So as we see in our data, and everybody is starting to see it, elective surgeries are being postponed, canceled, and postponed. I think this creates a lot of need to figure out what you keep and how you keep things. So being able to look at your data more granularly and actually understand how to allocate real OR space, as ORs are also being converted to coronavirus overflow intensive care units. These are day-to-day decisions that you may want to have if you don't have your data available, visualizable. If you don't have insights that can actually help you decide, you have to do all of this manually. And of course, that gets harder and harder the more the surge is actually happening. And I think that we see the worst of that in Italy. As you know, Joe, we're also a European company. Once a surge happens, it's very difficult to plan things. So any planning that you can do to be ready to, so you don't have to think anymore as much in a real time situation. That's how we overlay. So it's literally taking data that is hard for a human or to digest, him or herself, and present it in bite-sized chunks to really make decisions. And I think on the clinical side, it means really planning ahead for these remote instances, right? I mean, we have a lot of situations where surgeons or physicians just can't get to hospitals anymore. So the telemedicine aspect applies in intensive care and in surgery very much so, and the ability to help manage difficult cases where you can't be on site anymore is something that's going to be very relevant.
It's interesting that while probably one of the most important relationships between a person and another person is the delivery of healthcare, right? We still, after hundreds and hundreds of years, still do that in an analog fashion with very little connected data or metrics to drive decisions. And now suddenly we're in the midst of an environment like coronavirus, where the volumes are just insane and they're going to continue to be that way. And we are trying to parse through analog data and not even make evidence-based decisions on things. They're just hunches at that point in time. And so what an interesting time, and at least we can look at this perhaps downrange rather than never on how do we increase efficiencies. Our government plays war games with data, with tanks and missiles and carriers, yet we haven't played war games against a virus using intelligent data. And that's a very, very profound situation we're in right now.
Absolutely. No, I agree. I think if there is ever a silver lining to an emergency situation like this, that downstream, we're going to use this, and hospitals will use this as a way to jog this kind of innovation, right? So ability to use decision support to be prepared will increase, right? I mean, we see this again in China that already handled a part of it. That led to a massive deregulation of telemedicine, cloud aspects, decision supports. At the end of the day, we will come out more efficient out of this. And I think it's unfortunate that we have to be talking about it in this context, but the way people rally typically, and the way the government has been very supportive by providing a variety of measures already in terms of liability immunity for deploying innovation faster, all these things undoubtedly, just like any crisis, will lead to positive results.
Agreed. You had mentioned earlier that you have your organization overseas. What percentage of it is overseas?
Over 50%.
Wow. And then, so as a CEO, you've got leadership challenges, not just working from home here domestically, but connectivity where scenarios are changing and lockdowns are in some countries and not others. Tell me what you're facing right now as a leader.
Yeah, I think to a certain degree we've been fortunate. Something that made it unfortunate from a business management perspective, this dilution of offices before has made us a Zoom first organization some time ago. So that's been very helpful for us from our business continuity perspective. And I think a big chunk of our portfolio is entirely digital products. So these analytics are deployed entirely virtually. So, fortunately for us, we've been able to support our clients seamlessly and even increase support for new clients as they face a bigger pressure. But of course, if we're talking about real on-site presence, which is important for anything real time, and especially for our medical device partners, that is getting a lot harder. So our focus has been on daily huddles from communications as leaders perspective, right? Being able to over communicate, just like in any crisis, and be closer to our customers in the same way. And we're fortunate that we can do this. I think it's not uniform across different countries. We do have business in Italy. It is a very difficult situation. It's not possible to help anymore from our perspective remotely, right? I think they're in real kind of damage control mode. But I think fortunately most of the world, especially if it reacts and continue reacting more aggressively, can kind of keep the sanity of having key decision makers in place. And so for us, so far, we've been focusing on really helping our hospital partners and device partners to regain their business continuity and operate as we used to.
So what would be super valuable, I think, is we were all forced in very short time to be a remote team, remote organization. And I'm not sure many analog organizations that were used to face-to-face interaction were prepared or even had a plan in place for this. And I'm sure that's going to change moving forward. But what can you share with your fellow CEOs and leaders in the medtech industry and all those who are watching? What from a Zoom first environment, lessons and insights can you sort of share?
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, we had an internal call a few days ago, and somebody said, "Look, we have to operate as an internet company right now." And there's a lot of truth to that, right? The digital engagement you can maintain, especially for our partners in surgery specifically, let's say orthopedic surgery. There's a lot of time for certain stakeholders. You just have to find a way to leverage this time. So it is about digital engagement tools. It's about finding a way to add value now, which happens through digital engagement. And if you don't have it, find the tools that are out there. Fortunately, we've gotten a lot better about remote collaboration and remote tools, especially in the United States with cloud first environment. and doable, but you may have to look for tools, you may have to look for partners to continue the dialogue and to be able to help your clients.
Are there any specific tools that you've learned that you can share with your fellow medtech leaders and medtech partners that we would not be aware of, or you ran across that was something special?
No, I mean, I think from a perspective of internal collaboration, I think Zoom and the alternatives, as they're struggling with the capacity crunch of their own, with the influx of subscribers. I mean, that's probably common sense, and everybody from IT departments of other companies can figure this out. I think from a business perspective, being closer to the healthcare cloud providers, being able to closely link to anybody who offers remote capabilities that are tailored to healthcare. There are companies out there on the telemedical side. There are companies like ourselves for different specialties, right? For different disciplines that already have very robust solutions. Maybe they weren't a priority before. All these companies are operating very seamlessly because they're digital. So I think just looking, around what makes sense for you will probably yield very close results. I think the question for most, as for it is for us now, is how you can manage capacity. For us, we had 1,000% uptick in interest in using some of our solutions because it's just the only way to maintain contact. We are also not able to be able to do everything at the same time as an organization of 130 people. So I think if you can do it now, in case things get worse from capacity crunch, finding partners, finding tools, and finding redundant tools, that would be my recommendation. They're all out there, and I don't think it takes too much effort to find them.
You live and work and have designed a digital platform, which, I hope our viewers caught that is you are a digital virtual product company. So you're not carrying the inventory, nor have the supply chain challenges, nor the redundancy in supply chain. So, footnote out to those in the future that as you consider investment in medtech, right, think about that, because this is not going away. It's just going to be a series of these, I think, no longer black swans, because a black swan is never expected, and we better be expecting this moving forward. What's been the biggest surprise to you since last week when this hit the U.S. with meaning that you did not expect to happen, personally or professionally?
I guess personally, I've been, here in San Francisco in Menlo Park, and personally, I was surprised by how seamlessly the shelter-in-place situation, settled in. Ignoring the digital buzz from the Fox and the CNN and all these outlets, people are very, very civil, people very understanding, and people are completely compliant. Not everybody, not everywhere, but I think in general, there's quite a significant degree of preparedness that I noticed, and that was somewhat of a surprise to me. I know that it's not uniform, but it's good to see, right? That's exactly the kind of stuff that's going to help. On the let's say healthcare side, that we do track. We have data sharing, right? So we have about 2% of U.S. case volume that we can see daily in terms of capacity changes. And up through last week, aside from a few clusters like New York and Washington, there hasn't been really that much change in the way people were planning. And even in those clusters, there hasn't been that much change. And, that surprised me. And I think, that surprised me because we've been talking about this for a few months now. And I think people were waiting to make critical changes that will affect their business of healthcare and profitability for sure until now. And I think we're going to see a big bullwhip reaction now. And I think that has been somewhat understandable, but surprising that despite a lot of recommendations, a lot of hospitals have not made that change yet, and seemingly not have made some of the tougher trade-offs that they will have to make now.
Yeah, most of the time it's human nature not to harden a target until it becomes attacked. And we've seen that time and time again. And I have my own opinion, I think, on what the future of healthcare looks like, and almost I'm going to call it a supply chain militarization and build out. And I'm going to go out on a limb here. I was having a discussion with one of my senior people before. In the same way that our government had built missile silos out in the middle of the country for the Cold War, and the same way that there were barracks built out in the middle of nowhere for a Cold War, and there were runways built out in the middle of nowhere for a Cold War that, thank goodness, never came. I'm hoping that there's going to be a focus on building infrastructure for these types of situations where we can move people, tens of thousands, even hundreds of thousands of people en masse to those areas to create that burn line and treat them appropriately and not have healthcare providers and frontline people scrambling for just the common sense things, but we'll see what happens moving forward.
You're absolutely right. I mean, it's a situation where overnight, critical care capacity became the most valuable thing to have, right, in the world. I was just talking about this with my co-founder. This is something that is currently moving trillions of dollars one or the other way in the markets, and I think it is not consistent with how in the military world or even in the sports world we manage, situational awareness. And so I think we will learn from that. I think we have the ability to repurpose a lot of things. So we're talking about repurposing therapies, but repurposing digital tools works equally well, especially if the regulatory burden is reduced, even if temporarily. There are tons of great things you can do as long as the government is collaborative. And I think that's a good thing. The government is being productive increasingly so. And I think we're going to see solutions coming into the market very quickly. And I'm very optimistic that this will help us avoid the worst of it.
No doubt, no doubt. Well, I'm thankful that we've got platforms like Caresyntax, and we've got sort of thought leaders and the courageous ones up front on that digital landscape. Is there anything else you'd like to have our viewers think about or hear before we say goodbye and I let you get back to work?
Yeah, no, I think my message would be, I mean, we're fortunate to have a kind of an actionable set of things to do right in front of us. I know that in this time it's confusing, and the uncertainty of it and the lack of horizon could be paralyzing. I'd urge everybody to stay collected and think of solutions. The solutions are all around us. I think I think I made a comment about it a few days ago. This isn't a military conflict. The civility is maintained, our households are maintained, our internet connections are there. We have a lot of tools in our disposal. I think it is about doing things differently, though. Something, especially since we're talking about medical device world, the commitment to the sales infrastructure and doing business that was a tenet of these companies before, today is not going to work, at least in the short run, and maybe midterm has to change. So, this is the time where innovation, the risk of testing innovation is much lower. It's not going to disrupt any short-term promises. And I think, I would encourage everybody to think straight and find creative ways of dealing with the situation, both personally and professionally.
Agreed, agreed, and sage words there from a digital visionary. Thanks for that. I appreciate it, and I do appreciate your time. I wish you well. Stay safe, and I'll be back from time to time with you with some insights. That would be fabulous if you were available.
Thank you, Joe. Absolutely. Anytime. Thank you for having me.
Thanks. This has been Joe Mullings, The Other Side.